Let's talk a little bit about that bite in Texas now. We're talking panfish. We're talking crappies in particular. Wally, what kind of bite do you have going on right now down there in Texas?
Well, right now, you can probably catch them any way you'd like to. Standing timber, brush piles, bridge pilings, and especially boat docks, which I love to fish. I love to shoot boat docks. And this past week, I went to Cedar Creek Lake over in East Texas because everybody owns a boat dock there. And I look for those big old shady docks, and them crappie are stacked under there like cordwood.
That's awesome. So, Wally, explain to our listeners and viewers up here in the Midwest. We're in Minnesota, but we cover 10 states across the Midwest here in the Northern Tier. Tell us about that dock shooting technique. Explain to us the specifics of that a little bit, if you would.
Well, actually, you're taking a spinning rod combo, that's pretty flexible, the crappie actions, like a medium light or light action rod. And you shoot a 16th ounce or 32nd ounce jig up under these docks. And what the deal is because most of our lakes were built back in the 60s, 50s, 70s, and there's not any structure in the lakes per se except for man-made. And so the number one structure for all game fish is shade. And so grass produces shade, logs produces shade, standing timber, brush piles, all of it produces shade. But docks really produce shade, and those crappie will get back in there in those darkest areas and ambush the baits when they swim underneath those docks.
Okay.
And so you're trying to get your lure back up underneath that dock because a lot of our docks here in Texas are not floating docks. They are fixed docks with pilings. In other words, their own pipe or their own wood. And they're like stilts, that holds the dock up. And so you're shooting underneath there, and sometimes you've got maybe 6 inches to get it up under there, or you've got from the dock to the water, or maybe you may have 1.5 feet.
Right.
The docks have a lot of sunlight penetrating underneath them, not so much good for the crappie to be under there.
Sure.
But you get docks that are really shady, got those big sun decks on them, and man, you can get it back in there and you can watch that high vis line jump, man, and you can see the line jump before you feel it on your rod, So,
right.
But several, depending on the dock, you may have 25 or 30, you may have 50 under that one dock.
Wow.
Times you can limit out just on one dock if you catch them just right, and it has to be a sunshiny day to produce that shade.
Sure.
If it's cloudy overcast, those crappie are going to be out roaming looking for bait fish, not so much under the dock.
Cool.
So those days, I'll move to the brush piles or I'll go to standing timber or something like that.
Awesome. So, Wally, you talk about shooting. Explain that technique for our viewers and our listeners here in the North Country, because that's something that it's foreign to me, and I'm guessing most of our listeners were unfamiliar with that. Describe that technique, if you would.
Okay, what I like to do is put the spinning reel in my hand, splitting my middle finger and my ring finger, and I'm going to reach up and grab the line with my trigger finger. I flip the bell with my left hand. I'm right-handed, so I'll flip the bell open, holding onto the line, and I'll have my lure just right below the first guide on your spinning rod. So I will take my thumb and index finger. I'll hold my rod straight up to where the lure's right there at you, and you grab the head of the lure with the hook pointing towards the dock that you're shooting. You don't want the hook backwards to where it will stick your finger. You want it standing straight out, and it's standing straight up in that hook. The weir of that hook is pointing right at that dock. And so You pull back on the line, on the jig, and you load that rod up like a bow and arrow.
Okay.
And what you're going to do is let go of your trigger finger and the lure at the same time. It's a timing deal.
Sure.
And you're going to have your line parallel with the water, not up, not down. You can have it just tilted just a little bit because the angle that you have to get under that dock, the less room you have to shoot under that dock, the more flat your line has to be.
Sure, that makes sense.
And you have to be further back away from the dock. I can shoot with a Wally Marshall speed shooter or one of our new Pro Target rods. I can shoot a 16th ounce shad pole under that dock, probably about 60 feet.
Wow.
And if I can get some skip, I can get it in there fuzzy.
Sure.
And
sure.
so what you're doing, it's a reaction strike. Anything that comes underneath that dock, them crappie are going to attack it.
Mm-hmm. They're going to eat it.
And a lot of times when it gets warmer into the summers, I like to use a 32nd instead of a 16th because the lure falls slower and it stays in the strike zone longer.
All right. That makes sense.
Yeah. I can get it in there 35 to 40 feet, no problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you shoot it in there, you flip the bail back with your hand that you release the lure with. You just flip your bail back. You don't use the handle on your rod because you'll loop in your line, get it in behind your spool, and then you'll be working on your equipment instead of fishing.
Instead of catching them.
So when you load that up, you hold that jig right underneath your rod, and you keep that line parallel with the water, and you let go at the same time. Practice before you go.
Absolutely.
Go out on the main lake, practice shooting it, or practice at home with a 5-gallon bucket or whatever, and use like a 16th ounce bell weight and practice with that. I never use 1/8 ounce lures. Always 16th or 32nd.
Okay.
The great lures that work for me is shad poles, slab slangers, the Mr. Crappie baits. Those two baits right there are deadly on dock.